Today we need to talk about Joel Osteen because something absolutely devastating just happened at Lakewood Church that changes everything. For over 2 decades, millions of people have tuned in every single weekend to watch the man with America's most famous smile deliver his signature message of endless prosperity and divine protection. Behind those perfectly white teeth and that polished Houston accent, Joel built the largest megachurch in the country by promising that faith equals fortune, positivity prevents problems, and God's blessing means a life without struggle. But right now, as we speak in 2026, that entire empire is crashing down in ways that even his most loyal supporters can no longer ignore. We're not talking about minor controversy or typical church drama here. This is a complete systematic collapse happening in real time. Between federal investigations that just got deadly serious, financial scandals that make your head spin, and security failures that turned a place of worship into a literal crime scene, the prosperity gospel powerhouse is facing its darkest hour. The man who spent 25 years telling people that enough faith could shield them from life's worst nightmares is now discovering that no amount of positive thinking can protect you when the walls come crumbling down. Here's what makes this situation absolutely terrifying for Joel Osteen. His entire multi-million-dollar operation wasn't built on traditional theology or deep spiritual wisdom. It was constructed like a massive corporate marketing machine designed to sell hope to desperate people willing to pay premium prices for the promise of an easy life. Every sermon, every book deal, every television broadcast, and every stadium tour was carefully engineered to reinforce one simple message: if you believe hard enough and give generously enough, God will automatically bless you with wealth, health, and happiness. That formula worked like absolute magic for 25 years, turning a small Houston church into a global media empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But now the cracks aren't just showing, they're splitting wide open. When your entire brand depends on convincing people that faithful living equals problem-free living, what happens when massive problems start exploding inside your own building? When the core promise of protection fails spectacularly in front of a global audience, the whole illusion doesn't just fade away slowly, it shatters instantly. And for Joel Osteen, a man whose personal fortune and public reputation depend entirely on maintaining that illusion of divine invincibility, these recent developments aren't just bad news, they represent an existential threat to everything he's spent his entire adult life building. The question isn't whether Lakewood Church can survive this crisis, it's whether the prosperity gospel movement itself can survive what's coming next. The warning signs have been building for years, but most people missed them because they were distracted by the dazzling stage production and feel-good messaging. Let's start with what happened on a quiet Sunday morning in February 2024 that should have been a massive wake-up call for everyone paying attention. A shooter walked directly past multiple security checkpoints at Lakewood Church carrying an AR-15 rifle and opened fire inside the main lobby area. Think about that for just a moment. This wasn't some random street violence or a distant tragedy that Joel could address with comforting platitudes from behind his protected pulpit. This was actual gunfire echoing through the halls of a building where 16,000 people come every weekend specifically to hear about God's supernatural protection. The chaos that followed was absolutely nightmarish. Families with young children scrambled under pews, screaming and running for emergency exits while off-duty police officers engaged in an active shootout right there in the church lobby. A 7-year-old child was critically wounded in the crossfire, and the entire massive facility had to be evacuated and sealed off as a crime scene. For hours, yellow police tape surrounded the building while SWAT teams swept through every corner of what was supposed to be America's safest spiritual sanctuary. But here's what makes this incident particularly devastating for Joel Osteen's brand. His entire ministry has spent decades promising that faithful people who follow his teachings will be divinely protected from exactly these kinds of horrific experiences. The core selling point of prosperity gospel theology is that enough faith creates an invisible shield around believers, keeping them safe from the random violence and senseless tragedies that plague the rest of the world. So when that protection fails catastrophically inside his own church building, it doesn't just contradict his theology, it completely destroys the fundamental promise that millions of people have been paying to believe. In the aftermath, Joel stood in front of news cameras looking visibly shaken, trying his absolute best to maintain that trademark smile while explaining how such a thing could happen in a place dedicated to positive thinking and divine blessing. You could see the cognitive dissonance playing out in real time. How do you tell your congregation to keep believing in supernatural protection when that protection just failed spectacularly on live television? How do you maintain the illusion of invincibility when the whole world just watched armed police officers drag a bleeding child out of your lobby? The truth is, you can't. And that single incident marked the beginning of a downward spiral that has only gotten worse with each passing month. Because once people start questioning whether the protection is real, they inevitably start questioning everything else about the empire built on that promise. If you thought the shooting incident was an isolated tragedy, what came next revealed a pattern of institutional failure that goes much deeper than anyone realized. Just months after the security breach, federal investigators quietly began examining Lakewood Church's financial records as part of a broader crackdown on megachurch tax exemptions and questionable business practices. This wasn't some routine audit or minor compliance check. We're talking about serious federal scrutiny into how one of America's wealthiest religious organizations has been handling hundreds of millions of dollars in donations while its leadership lives like Hollywood celebrities. The timing couldn't have been worse for Joel Osteen. While he was still trying to rebuild public confidence after the shooting, investigators started asking uncomfortable questions about his personal wealth, the church's massive real estate holdings, and the mysterious financial arrangements that allow him to maintain a $10 million mansion while technically not taking a church salary. For decades, Joel had deflected criticism about his lavish lifestyle by claiming his wealth came exclusively from book sales and speaking fees, not from church donations. But federal investigators don't just accept public relations talking points, they dig into actual financial records, and what they're reportedly finding doesn't match the clean narrative Lakewood has been selling to the public. Here's where things get absolutely bizarre. Remember that story about hundreds of thousands of dollars being discovered hidden inside bathroom walls back in 2021? Well, it turns out that incident was just the tip of an iceberg that investigators are now exploring in much greater detail. Sources close to the investigation suggest that Lakewood's internal financial controls have been so poorly managed that significant amounts of cash have gone missing or unaccounted for multiple times over the years. We're not talking about small clerical errors or minor bookkeeping mistakes. These are substantial sums of money that somehow vanished from what should have been the most transparent and carefully monitored religious organization in America. Think about the staggering irony here. Joel Osteen has spent 25 years teaching people that financial blessing flows automatically to those who live righteously and manage their resources according to biblical principles. Yet his own organization apparently can't keep track of basic cash flow without losing fortunes inside construction materials. The man who wrote best-selling books about God's desire to prosper faithful people is now facing federal investigation into whether his prosperity came through legitimate means or through questionable financial arrangements that may have crossed legal boundaries. For someone whose entire public identity depends on projecting an image of divine favor and supernatural blessing, having federal investigators crawling through your financial records while your church literally loses money inside walls is about as far from blessed as you can possibly get. The illusion of divine prosperity becomes much harder to maintain when reality keeps contradicting the message. But the federal investigation and security failures are only part of a much larger picture that reveals just how fragile this entire empire really was from the very beginning. What most people don't realize is that Joel Osteen's success has always depended on a very specific set of cultural circumstances that are rapidly disappearing from American society. For 25 years, he rode the perfect storm of cable television expansion, suburban megachurch growth, and a generation of Americans who desperately wanted to believe that faith could guarantee material success. But that world is vanishing, and the new generation replacing it has zero tolerance for polished televangelists promising easy answers to complex problems. Young Americans today have watched their parents struggle through multiple economic recessions, witnessed countless religious scandals involving money and power, and grown up with instant access to information that exposes the gap between religious promises and real-world outcomes. When they see Joel Osteen standing in front of his 16,000-seat arena talking about God's desire to bless faithful people financially, they don't see inspiration, they see exploitation. They understand that the system is designed to funnel money upward from struggling families to wealthy religious celebrities who live in mansions while preaching about humility. Social media has completely destroyed the protective bubble that used to shield megachurch leaders from sustained criticism. Decades ago, Joel could control his image through carefully managed television appearances and selective press interviews. Today, every awkward moment gets filmed, every contradictory statement gets fact-checked in real time, and every expensive purchase gets documented and shared across platforms that reach millions of people instantly. The famous smile that used to disarm critics now looks increasingly fake to viewers who have access to behind-the-scenes footage showing the massive security details, private jets, and luxury lifestyle that contradict the humble message coming from the pulpit. Even worse for Joel, former church members and ex-employees are now speaking out publicly about what really happens behind the scenes at Lakewood Church. These aren't disgruntled outsiders making wild accusations. These are people who worked directly with the organization for years and witnessed firsthand how the massive fundraising operation actually functions. They're describing a corporate environment where donations are treated like revenue streams, where staff are pressured to maximize giving through emotional manipulation techniques, and where the leadership lives completely disconnected from the financial struggles experienced by regular congregation members. The combination of federal scrutiny, security failures, financial scandals, cultural shifts, and insider testimony has created a perfect storm that no amount of positive thinking can weather. Joel Osteen built his empire on sand, and now the tide is coming in fast. So where does this leave Joel Osteen as his carefully constructed world collapses around him? The man who spent decades telling millions of people that faith could shield them from life's worst troubles is now discovering that no amount of positive confession can protect you when federal investigators, public opinion, and basic reality all turn against you at the same time. He's trapped in a prison of his own making, forced to keep smiling and preaching prosperity while his empire burns down in full view of the global audience he spent 25 years cultivating. The tragedy here isn't just about one wealthy televangelist facing consequences for questionable choices. This entire saga represents the spectacular failure of a movement that convinced vulnerable people to confuse material success with spiritual blessing, that taught desperate families to measure God's love by the size of their bank accounts, and that turned ancient wisdom about faith and suffering into a slick marketing campaign designed to generate maximum revenue for celebrity pastors. Joel Osteen didn't create this system, but he perfected it, scaled it to unprecedented heights, and used it to build a personal fortune that rivals Hollywood's biggest stars. But the real victims in this story aren't wealthy televangelists losing their reputations, they're the countless ordinary people who sacrificed their financial security based on promises that were never going to be kept. How many families sent their last dollars to Lakewood Church believing that their faithful giving would trigger a divine financial breakthrough? How many people postponed medical treatment, delayed home repairs, or skipped family necessities because they thought tithing to Joel's ministry would guarantee supernatural provision? How many believers are now questioning their entire faith because the prosperity they were promised never materialized while the man who made those promises got richer and richer? The collapse of Joel Osteen's empire serves as a harsh reminder that empires built on illusion eventually collide with reality, leaving behind broken promises and shattered trust. When maintaining a perfect image becomes more important than telling hard truths, when preserving wealth takes priority over serving people in genuine need, and when success is measured by stadium size rather than authentic spiritual transformation, the foundation inevitably cracks under the weight of its own contradictions. As federal investigations continue, security concerns mount, and public opinion shifts decisively against the prosperity gospel industry, one thing becomes absolutely clear. The era of untouchable mega-church celebrities is coming to an end, and Joel Osteen's current crisis might just be the beginning of a much larger reckoning that transforms American religion forever. The stage lights can keep shining, but the audience is finally walking away.